days after Egypt's revolution, there are signs that the military is consolidating its power. On Sunday, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces announced it's dissolving parliament and suspending the constitution. The statement read on Egyptian state television also said the military council will remain in power for 6 months or until elections are held.
The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces issued the following decrees. 1. Suspend the Constitution. 2. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces will run the country for a temporary period of 6 months or until legislative and presidential elections are held. 3. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces will represent the Council internally and externally. 4. Dissolution of the People's Assembly and the Shura Council. 5. The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is empowered to issue decrees that have the force of law during the transitory period. 6. Form a committee to amend some clauses of the Constitution and determine the rules for a popular referendum about them. 7. Mandate the cabinet of Dr. Ahmed Mohamed Shafiq to continue its work until a new government is formed. 8. Organize elections for the People's Assembly and the Shura Council, as well as presidential elections. 9. The state commits itself to implementing international treaties and commitments to which it is a party.
To find out more about how Egyptians have responded to this news, we go to Cairo, to Democracy Now!'s senior producer, Sharif Kouddous. Sharif, welcome to Democracy Now! While we did all sorts of special broadcasts on Friday, not everyone heard them. Can you share your reaction to what has taken place in your country, in Egypt?
Well, Amy, I was in front of the Maspero building, the state TV building, when I first heard the news that Mubarak had indeed stepped down. At first, I didn't even believe that it had happened. There was just a cheer that rose up through the crowd. I wasn't exactly clear what was going on. People were hugging me and jumping up and down. I didn't really believe that he had left. And then I finally spoke to my father, and he said that Omar Suleiman had announced that Mubarak had resigned. And it was a very emotional moment for me. And it was difficult to comprehend at the time, and we rushed back to Tahrir. It was a joyous moment for I think all Egyptians, and really for people who fight for democracy around the world. This was a popular uprising, a peaceful one, a pluralistic one, and one that I think captured the imaginations of many people around the world. But as we know, the struggle has just begun. The road is still long. This was one obstacle, albeit a very big obstacle. But now that that has been overcome, people are looking to what comes next. And as you said in your introduction, the military yesterday issued another statement dissolving both houses of parliament, the People's Assembly and the Shura Council, and also suspending the Constitution. This was part of what protesters were demanding. Other demands that have not been met are the repeal of the emergency laws, which have been in effect since Mubarak came to power in 1981, as well as the release of political prisoners. And so people are still calling for that. And what's coming up next is that within the next 2 months, a committee of legal scholars is going to draft a new constitution, which will be put to a popular referendum, and then elections will be held within 6 months. But joining me here now in Cairo is Issandr Amrani. He's an independent journalist who runs a very popular Arabist blog. Issandr, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you just talk about what are these changes? What do they mean for Egypt right now? The constitution has been suspended. Parliament is dissolved. What's going to happen in these next few months?
Well, I mean, basically what it means is that we're in a legal no man's land. There's no constitution. There's no legitimate government in place other than the Supreme Military Council. It can effectively rule by decree. And how it's going to develop is going to depend on how the civilian side of government, together with the opposition, will work together with the military to form, the mechanism for this transition to take place. That from the committee that's deciding on whether to amend the current constitution or perhaps even create a new one, to decide what political parties can compete in the forthcoming elections. There's hundreds of questions, thousands of questions that are going to have to be addressed by this committee. And I think the committee is probably, I mean, the Supreme Military Council is not going to want to do that entirely by itself. It's going to want to delegate that to both the cabinet ministers and to hopefully an inclusive cross-party council of some form.
I wanted to bring in Sharif and Issandr Mona El-Ghobashy, who's a political science professor here in New York at Barnard College, who has been following the social movements in Egypt for a decade. Professor El-Ghobashy, there was a meeting that took place yesterday.
To follow up on what Issandr was saying, yesterday there was a meeting of the youth protesters, a delegation of about 10 of them, including Wael Ghunaim, the Google executive, who of course has become very much an icon of this revolution. He then put the notes of the meeting on his Facebook page, and it was a very cordial meeting. They, of course, are treading on very delicate ground.
But explain exactly who was there.
The representatives were as follows: Wael Ghunaim representing himself and representing the Facebook page.
And this was the Google executive who was held for 12 days and then came out, and it was perhaps the biggest day of revolt before the final day.
That's right. And he's become very much a youth spokesman, an unintended youth spokesman of this revolt. There was also Ahmed Maher, who is a member of the April 6th movement, which was very critical in launching this protest to begin with on January 25th. Several other members of April 6th. In total, there were about 10 youth, and they met with 2 members of the Supreme Military Council. And according to the notes that he posted on his Facebook page, it was a very cordial meeting. They discussed the 2 demands, the 2 core demands of the protesters that Issandr just pointed out, and that is the lifting of the emergency law, which has been in place since September 6, 1981, and the release of all political prisoners, which human rights estimates put in the thousands.
Issandr, do you hear more on the ground about this meeting in Cairo?
Well, what we know from what the participants said is that they were pleasantly surprised that the military, you have to realize that the people in this military council, they're in their 60s and 70s. People are used to having their orders obeyed. And the interaction was actually surprisingly cordial, as Professor El-Ghobashy just said. And they were quite happy that they weren't, it wasn't patronizing in any way. Now, but this meeting, you know, is a gesture towards the protesters that held Tahrir for 18 days. It doesn't tell us what exactly the transition mechanism is going to be. It doesn't tell us how this relationship between the military and the opposition groups has to be systematized in some way. It has to be more inclusive, and the Tahrir groups aren't the only ones who need to be included in this. So we still know very little. The military seems to be going day by day. It's not great at communicating. You have to remember, for 30 years the military was kept in the background, not in the foreground of Egyptian politics. And I think it has to grow into this role too.
Sharif, I wanted to just give you this latest news. Of course, it's like yards from you, and I'm giving it to you in New York, but, you know, sometimes it's hard to find out these things right next door. Just as you were coming into the studio, protests were halted in Tahrir between military police separating groups of demonstrating police officers and anti-police protesters in Tahrir. And Al Jazeera is saying that they are not able to transmit any live pictures because the army has ordered Al Jazeera and other international media outlets to stop filming the square. Talk about what is unfolding in Tahrir now and what has happened over the weekend, and whether the protests will be allowed to continue.
Well, Amy, Tahrir today, I was actually there when there was a crowd of policemen there who had come to protest. They were trying to protest in solidarity with the protesters and also ask for better wages. They were shouted down by protesters there. Let's keep in mind there's very few protesters left in Tahrir. Traffic is flowing somewhat smoothly through the square. There's maybe a few hundred protesters in small pockets around the square. And they basically chanted for the policemen to get out. You know, these, of course, is the hated Central Police Force that tortured them and beat them for many years, and that they battled with on January 25th and January 28th. And just the sight of them causes many people to be very angry. And so they were being kind of marched out of Tahrir when I was there. Having said that, there's military police all over Tahrir right now, and I was personally yelled at with 2 camera people very loudly by a military police officer telling me to clear the area. I said, why? He said, don't ask me why, and he kind of pushed me away. I heard him tell another person, if I see anyone sleeping here tonight, they're going to prison. And so they're really trying to kind of assert their control over Tahrir. And yesterday there was a lot of very vigorous and heated and sometimes very angry debates between former protesters in Tahrir who were there, part of the mass pro-democracy movement, who were arguing with people who wanted to spend the night in Tahrir, who wanted to continue protesting until more demands are met. So some people believe that the pressure and the fight needs to continue from outside Tahrir. Some, I would call them a minority, want to stay in Tahrir and make their presence known. But I think regardless of what happens, and Issandr, maybe you can jump in here, that something in Egypt has changed in terms of public protest. I think we're going to see people have not been able to have public protests in 30 years, and now they have, and we see marches happening all the time. I'm not sure that's ever going to change again.
And that's right, Sharif. I mean, you know, shortly before, I just came back to Egypt. I live in Egypt most of the time, but I came back to Egypt on January 28th, just for the biggest and most violent protest that took place. And I was in Tunisia the week beforehand. And Tunisia is kind of like you're looking ahead 2-3 weeks ahead of time. What's happening in Tunisia now, what has happened for the last 2 weeks, it's constant protesting. After 23 years of no protests being allowed, you have people who really want to express themselves, feel that they're participating in the revolution, participating in a historic moment in their country. And so I think we're going to see a lot of protests. And I don't think that the military is going to be in a position to really completely stop it. Frankly, I kind of understand that they want to clear the traffic in Tahrir Square because you have this central nexus in Cairo that's blocking traffic for the rest of the city. We have, you know, terrible traffic jams in the city, and they're even worse now than usual. What's more interesting is that we're seeing a lot of strikes starting at a lot of government-owned factories, in the civil service, in the private sector, and that strike movement, which is now probably determining the course of politics in Tunisia, is just beginning in Egypt. And the strike movement will be really something to look at carefully. Yesterday there was a report, it hasn't been confirmed, that the military intends to ban strikes. I really doubt it's going to be able to do this. I mean, something fundamental has changed in the way Egyptians participate.